Okay.
Hey, Mel.
Hi, Julia.
It's a fiery fireplace, widow's fire time. Welcome to the campfire.
It's all coming together.
Yeah.
How are you feeling in the new year?
You know what? Good. Not so good there for a bit. That's a tricky time of year, and you don't really know how it's going to catch you off guard out of nowhere in different ways. And weather was not good, and just it was slow. It kind of dragged. I'm happy to be on the other side of it, and some nice positive things to think about. And also referencing the most recent article, blog post, we're going to talk about a few things that I think are uplifting and useful, helpful. And I have my decaf coffee that I've made, which is a ritual, because we're going to talk about rituals. I really appreciate and enjoy something like making a hot drink, and I've switched to decaf. So it's my new thing where I know I'm making it for no other reason than to have and hold and sip a hot drink, because it's part of my way of creating a nice day for myself.
Well, I should probably join you on the decaf train. I've already had my one coffee that is caffeinated, and I cannot go over one. So I've got some water here, and I'm balancing you out with a cold, like heavy glass. Like that's how I feel right now. And my kitchen's a little cold, so we've got like the yin and yang going here.
It's nice to talk about environment and temperatures and sensations, because that links back to our other talk that involved eroticism and just using our senses and how we feel.
Yes. Not to go too off topic, because I'm really excited to talk about dating, but do you prefer being hot or cold? Like if you had to suffer through one of them?
Cold actually, because I like the feeling of warming up more than when I'm hot and I cool down. The cooling down is a relief, but there's something about being cold that there's I don't like it, but I can handle it. I find being too hot a little bit of a claustrophobic vibe.
I get that. I so get that. I love that. So it's almost nice to be in the winter time. I do have to remind myself that winter can be really challenging, but then also there are so many rewarding parts to it, like what you just said, like coming in, warming up, giving yourself sort of that relief after being freezing. I'm with you. I prefer to be cold and then have to get warmed up again. So
this time of year, I've been seeing more online about not making January the start of a new year. And I really like that. And I support that. The new year is spring. Like this is the time for quiet. This is a hibernation period. Mother Nature is sleeping and everything's just, cold and taking a break. And then spring will come. So the whole January 1st, new year, new me thing it's not necessary. I like what we're talking about today. Let's talk about this list. Do you like a list, Mel?
I love lists. Listicle me up. I love making lists, crossing things off lists. So hit me up with this hot wid dating tip list, because I think dating is on a lot of people's minds now. It is the start of the new year, even though, a lot of people don't want to feel that way. Some people are setting that as an expectation for 2025. So Julia, we're so curious to hear your thoughts on what are your recommendations? What's your to-do list for when someone starts wanting to date?
Well, I feel like just after Christmas, depending everyone's in such a different scenario, and I'm so aware of that. So it's almost like take everything anyone says with a pinch of salt, right? Like it has to, whatever applies to you applies to you. But some people will have been going through their first holiday season without their partner. And you feel that singleness, widowiness. And so that can either inspire action we get to decide, sink or swim. Like, do we want to keep moving forward in romantic ways, or is it just kind of all a bit too much and we just now need to what's the word I'm looking for when you're just trying to
reset maybe, or
yeah. So I feel, because being widowed for me absolutely did not mean that I was finished with love and romance. Dating has always been on my mind. Like, if I wasn't with someone, I was on apps or telling friends, set me up with someone. If you're a romantic person, or you want to meet someone, and it's on your mind, it doesn't matter how long you've been widowed. You can put yourself in situations, but before you do, I think it's good to be aware of a few things. I do have one of my best widow buddies is about to go on her first date ever
since being widowed.
Yeah, and she was widowed a good 6-ish years ago.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big deal.
She's around my age. I think she's now sort of probably early 40s, and she has a young son, and she wasn't interested in pursuing dating. And now she is, and she's gone on the apps, and she went on Hinge, and she's been messaging with someone, and they're going to meet. And this is all very new to her. And there's only so much you can really say or explain to someone, because you do have to have the lived experiences. Like, you have to actually go into the world and have experiences. You can listen to as many podcasts as you want and read as many articles as you want. And I've always felt this way, particularly when people sit at home and watch reels and go on Instagram and swipe on apps. And it's like, that's fine. And it has its moment, its place, and its time for that in your day. But also, like, are you going out? Like, are you actually doing some things? Because it's the only way stuff actually happens. And you kind of will find out what happens when I actually do stuff. So I'm really pleased for her that she's pulling the trigger on a date. I wish I could impart some wisdom to her, which I can't, because she has to do it for herself. But basically just around managing expectations, because I think particularly when widowed, and if you came from a really happy, healthy marriage, I think there is a naivete around meeting another lovely person. I just expected that I would meet another wonderful man, and it couldn't be that hard to do that. And for some people, it's not. So I'll be interested to hear from her how it went, because she's doing a lot of just messaging. They haven't spoken on the phone. They've been messaging for enough days that I feel like you got to get in person as quickly as possible. I just feel like you just got to get in front of people, because it's the only way to practice. It's the only way to find out where you're at. It's the only way to find out what your communication style is, how you feel about meeting someone new. You won't know until you go on these dates. So a lot happens in the action part of it.
Yeah.
Do
you think that the inaction is caused by fear, or just too much comfort in being too much in a comfort zone on your own at home, or both? Like, what do you think is that the cause for some people who do just scroll, who are like armchair daters, basically?
Yes, I think there's two things, and I'm picking up on this sometimes in the community when people are talking about their thoughts and feelings and they're sharing. I think there's an avoidance because it's foreign territory, and there's like a kind of procrastination, or like you're not really sure how, so you kind of don't, and that's fair. But the other thing I've definitely picked up on is like a pessimistic assumption that kind of people suck, the dating culture sucks. And I think there's a lot of negativity that widows can fall into, because there's like almost a bitterness, like a quickness to bitterness. when you have a couple of bad scenarios and you kind of write it off. I've seen people just blanket statements of, that's it for me, I guess, like jumping to like an actual conclusion about how life is and will go. Like there's some destination you've reached where it's like, well, forget it. It's like, no, you just like had that experience. So I do feel like people then shut down, shut off because it didn't go the way they thought it was supposed to go, thought it should go. How do we know how it's supposed to go? We can't know. And so there's a lot of, oh, I had a bad experience, therefore woe is me. And you put that on top of being a widow, it's like extra pity party mode, which again has its like time and place. It's not like you can't feel sorry for yourself.
Yeah.
But I definitely see a lot, there's like avoidance and then like a jumping to like a general assumption that I'll never find love again. So never mind. Yeah. You kind of let yourself off the hook. So then I don't have to do the vulnerable piece.
Well, that's a really interesting point. And I think people do have to put themselves out there. It takes a lot of courage. I think like Widows for Our Community helps with that because you can even go back to the community and talk about a date you had or talk about an experience and get other people's feedback so you're not just in your own bubble. But Julia, on the flip side of that, I know that something that you've talked about before is like doing your research on, what are some of the things that you might come up against as a widow going out into the dating world. And on the flip side of being, saying, I don't want this anymore. Like I'm done with this. This was a bad experience. The other side of that could be falling really hard, really fast. And I want you to talk a little bit about what that experience is like. And I think that there's a term for this also where even the person you're dating may not feel it right away, but it can often affect widows and widowers. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yes. And I always love the flip side. I always love the flip side to things.
I love it.
There always is. We can't generalize anything too much because there's the other side of it, which I've experienced both and everything in between. There can be a knee-jerk reaction from loss to just want a sense of security and normalcy. And I certainly did this. I just wanted everything to be okay again. So it wouldn't have even mattered who it was. The first guy I started dating soon after my husband died, and it was someone he knew and liked and trusted, a colleague of his. And he had basically told me like it wouldn't be the worst thing if I dated that guy if anything happened to him and he died. So
yeah, pre-approval helps.
Yeah, it was odd. It was an odd conversation. I remember vividly because he was sick, but we didn't have any idea of him dying or anything. And so I did see someone right after him, and I just wanted to jump right back into a life I knew. I wanted to be partnered, and I wanted still to be married. So I didn't really care that much if I liked this guy a lot or not. And I went full steam ahead, and a fire like that can burn bright, like right, at the start, and there isn't really anything to sustain it. And it's kind of like when you light newspaper, you've got like, you're trying to build a fire and there's newspaper and like one log and like no kindling, and it doesn't catch, like it does the big whoosh with the newspaper and like the newspaper burns out, and then it just kind of goes. I feel like I've had a lot of those because I was trying to put like just replace. I really was. And we don't think that's what we're doing. And I would have been adamant at the time at the time that that's not what I was doing. But of course, hindsight, everything in hindsight, I definitely just wanted what I wanted. I wanted everything to be okay. And that felt like the way to do it. And so with a lot of guys, I had this experience of what I wouldn't find out for quite some time. It wasn't a word that got brought up around me or that I already knew of, which is limerence. And I actually read a really good book, which we could link to recommend, and we could put it in our resources.
Definitely.
Limerence is basically that thing we don't even mean to do, but we put people on pedestals that they haven't earned. And we look up, it was so easy for me to look up to a man. Like I meet a man and I would just decide that he knew something that I didn't. Like he was more confident. I just assumed all this stuff about him that made me feel like if I could just be with this person, then I would be okay and I would be rescued. You're essentially seeing someone as like you're someone who will save you. And it's basically also another way it can be worded is person addiction. You become addicted to the idea of a person. And I think a lot of people can relate to this just in general. When we get a crush on someone and we think they're so great, but we don't really know them and we haven't gotten to know them. And you couldn't possibly think they're that great that fast or at all once you've gotten to know them and they're actually showing you a lot of signs that you're not compatible or they're not a kind person, but you've already, that limerence is so strong that you just can't see straight. You're kind of blinded by limerence, and it's really tricky to come away from. And that's why it is worth knowing that it exists, because I don't know if I should say this, but get to know anybody well enough. And we are all like just pretty ordinary. Like we're all, as in we're all equal playing field of just being a human being. So there really shouldn't be anyone in your life who is like so far up here when you compare yourself.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be someone you need so that you can be okay. But I was guilty of this for years. I thought if I could just be with someone again and have a partner again and be loved the way I was loved before again, then I'll be okay. And this person is the answer. Like I really felt like my first boyfriend was like, he was the key to unlocking everything in my life being absolutely fine again.
So, Julia, if you were to recommend somebody to sort of defend themselves in advance of limerence, like for example, like maybe like have a friend in their life be sort of aware of this so that they can watch you in case you go down this path. Like what are some ways that you can, kind of prepare yourself or defend yourself against this potentially happening? Because I do feel like widows and widowers can be more susceptible and more vulnerable to this condition or this thing.
That's such a tricky one because everyone is just dealing sort of with what's right in front of them when they're widowed. I was actually thinking about this earlier when I knew we were going to be talking about this. I read things. I remember reading early days that you shouldn't start dating if you're, what is the quote? It's almost like until you feel you can be interested in someone, like the actual person, or are you just interested in the feeling? Like, are you just interested in feeling better? Like, is it, I'm going to date so that I can, be okay. If you're actually meant to start dating again, or so they say, you want to date when you are actually interested in becoming interested in the actual person you're meeting.
Like a selfless
date. Yeah. Like, can you get interested in the actual person you're meeting? Or are you basically trying to escape a feeling that you're having? And so you're using that person. Like, are you interested in the actual person? And I wasn't for a long time. It was more like, what can they do for me? And it was partly subconscious. Like I wouldn't have been able to admit that at the time. But reading that, I remember reading it and thinking, well, I don't care. I remember reading like a snippet, an excerpt that was something about that, like go dating again once you're ready to like actually take an interest in another person. And I just thought it's not the time to worry about something like that. I was in survival mode and I didn't care about following any helpful tips. That's why I'm aware that no matter what people take in, it's good to inform yourself. And then you are actually going to do what you're going to do anyway. I'm so aware of it. Like people are on their own paths and some things, will go in one ear and out the other. And like we filter, right? Based on We just kind of hear what we want to hear.
Yeah.
So I think partly why Widows Fire, the community, exists is because we should allow each other to just do whatever it is we think we need to do. And then, yes, we'll find out later if that was, what that actually means for us. There needs to be that freedom, like a liberation of people stumbling along and picking some things up and putting them back down. And no, that might be useful. And oh, yeah, that would be a good idea, but I'm not actually going to do that.
Yeah.
We can just be there for each other. Like, oh, you know about limerence. And this, once I knew what limerence was, it didn't solve it. It didn't actually make me just not experience that anymore, but it definitely came into my life at the right time. And I read the book at a time where I was able to take it in and then remember it, because that could have been like some term I just forgot about. So what are you open to hearing? How, at what point in your journey are you ready to look at aspects of yourself that are kind of just boring patterns at a certain point? I was getting really sick of feeling these high highs for people, waiting it out just to come down from it when it didn't work out. And then the next one, you get this hit, and that's the person addiction piece. So like any addiction, you're not going to just be like, oh, I know it's called limerence. Well, then I'm okay now.
Exactly.
Never mind. Now I know what it is. It doesn't, it doesn't exist anymore. No, but
Exactly.
I think to just be able to allow each other. If someone were talking to me, like in the community, if someone was really hung up on someone new and just really wanted it to work out, I can completely empathize with you just wanting it to work out. It feels like the solution. It feels like the answer to all your problems sometimes when you're widowed. And it wouldn't be, because even, once you're partnered again, that brings on its own new set of challenges. So
it's true.
we just have to allow each other to be where we all are at any
And
time.
I love that. And I think the community does that. And in a way, when you were saying that earlier about the community being that place for us to, mess up and come back and talk about it, it just feels like an unconditional safe space, which actually draws comparisons in my mind to being a kid again, almost. And there's something really interesting you wrote in the latest blog post. I'm going to quote the line, and you wrote this, and I love it. It's, the end of your partner's life was the beginning of an extremely new one for you. So it feels like a tragic rebirth in a way, like a sad rebirth, but it is a new one. And it draws similarities for me to that. Like, we're all sort of picking things up for the first time and figuring things out for the first time, and we're going to mess up. And like, how many times do you tell your kid, or did you tell your children, don't do that? And then they still do it, right? But you're going to love them anyway. You're going to be there for them anyway. And I get that vibe completely from the community. So yeah, I love that. I love how you brought that together. I think another piece of the blog or another piece of this, this whole dating aspect for widows and widowers is around rituals. And I know that this is a really important topic for you, Julia, and how you build these into your life. Can you talk a little bit about, how introducing these or being aware of existing rituals can help?
Rituals are very personal in widowhood, and they hold a lot of potential for new growth, and also a way of honoring the person we lost. So for some, it's too painful to hold on to something that they did every day with their person. And that would be something to play around with in your own time, trying it out if you want to keep doing those things, because they can be a comfort, or it could backfire and you don't enjoy that thing anymore. So rituals do allow and can really introduce some stability in a very unstable time of life and ongoing. It doesn't matter I mean, timelines are completely irrelevant in widowhood. And I can definitely say that now, coming up to 7 years, because I remember seeing people who would comment on forums and Instagram posts and things and talk about how it was 23 years and they felt this way. They're heartbroken. And I didn't know how to make sense of that. And I actually saw just the other day someone comment on an Instagram post and said how daunting it felt to read things like that. They said, oh, I lost my husband 6 weeks ago, and all I'm seeing are these people years from now still struggling. And it's very upsetting. And I was glad that I could actually reply to her and say, I know I'm going off topic here from rituals, but I'm coming back. I was glad I could, from where I am now, say to her that I remember feeling that way, and you don't know what to make of that. And it is something that in time I have discovered the loss really is forever. So if you hear about someone who's 20, 30 years widowed and they're saying that they're still upset about it, it's not like their whole life is wrecked. Like, this is the thing, like there is still life. And then you see a comment like that because you feel like that. Yes, but it's not like that has ended up being, my whole 7 years. If I were to say I'm devastated that I lost my husband, that is true. But it's also true that I've had an amazing life over these 7 years. Like, there's no denying that there are still opportunities for amazing experiences and lovely days and wonderful moments. There is something about having to let two things be true at the same time. Like, it's really horrendous that my husband died when I was 31 and just gave birth. That's really, that will always be bad. Like, that will always be bad. And yet I am also delighted to sip my coffee and enjoy that experience and have a nice day and be glad that my son's off at school and I can have this conversation with you. It is important that we look after ourselves and create a life that we enjoy, because that is our responsibility. So I think rituals are a great place, because this does link to dating. It's funny how much we can think we're going off topic, but it all ties in. How you feel about yourself and your day and your boundaries and your little things that you do for you that just about do set you up to be this really interesting, attractive person across the table from someone new or not. And as much as the term widow almost makes me feel like, oh, you almost want to let people off the hook, like they have some excuse for being extra sad. And, there is such an opportunity for transformation and becoming someone new. And it traces all the way back to the little things you're doing in your day, your rituals. And they take a while to find, but if you can grab some good ones straight away. I remember in the first weeks, like first days, because I have all like diary entries and transcribed voice notes that I would send back and forth with friends. And I made a point of saying, I showered today and I put on some makeup. And I remember saying, because putting on makeup makes me feel like I do have some sense of control. Like, it does make me feel better to be a little bit made up. So, and there is that that phrase, like look good, feel good. Look good, feel good.
Oh yeah.
So, and my widowed mother-in-law, like she wouldn't go one day without putting her face on. Like she would always put her makeup on. It was like a sign of self-respect. And it was in honor of her husband, because she liked to be made up around him. And I just found that really inspiring, because it is, depending what frame of mind you're in, if you're having a bad day and you just want to be a kind of a slob, which of course I've had many, I still have days like that. There is something about making an effort. So I guess I would say when it comes to rituals, it's a sign of making an effort that is a personal choice, and it can be anything. But if you can rely on it and it's of your doing and of your choosing, I think that's I just find that to be a really helpful grounding tool in widowhood, is pick a few rituals, and just know that you can count on them. And if they could be something in the morning, something in the evening, maybe it's just one thing that you know every day is there, something that you can enjoy on your own. Do you have anything like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are days when I don't do it and I know that I feel not as good about myself. Like I obviously always have the coffee ritual. I have the morning ritual. I have the podcast ritual. I like to, like treat my brain to something special just for me in the mornings. Like that is my thing. And it all of these little things I think do pick you up. They help you mentally. They help you feel better. They help you like present a better version of yourself to the world as well. And that is key.
Sometimes I think widows and widowers perhaps feel, because I did, that when your partner has died, you do cross over into this like other dimension where everyone around you just has no idea what it's really like. And from that place came a lot of anger for me, like a lot. Like I was just pissed off all the time. And it can become basically a really unfortunate habit. And this links into rituals, because it's so easy to take something that's happened in our life and make it our identity, and then be angry at the world around us for carrying on as it does. And I'm just picturing like a time where I would have been so angry that being in any way advised to do things, acts of self-love and self-care, actually made me more angry. I actually remember people saying things to me like, be gentle with yourself. And I never knew what they meant, what they were talking about. I didn't know what that looked like. I thought it was this cheesy, annoying expression that people were starting to use a lot, like be kind to yourself, just be gentle with yourself. People were saying that to me, and I was basically rolling my eyes a bit inside, because I thought, you don't have an effing clue. Like you just don't understand. And so I would get defensive all the time. So I'm just remembering, just for anyone who's in that place and hearing two people talk about like making their coffee and sipping their coffee and like reading a magazine and putting on lotion and all my things that I do now that I enjoy because I've found my way through that chunk of bitterness, which I think lasted like a good 2 years. I was just so angry. So if anyone had told me, soak in a hot bath and take some nice breaths and like, go to a Pilates class, I would have been like, you don't get it because you're not widowed. Like you don't understand. And my reaction to everything was just like, you just don't get it. Like I wanted to, like my identity as a widow that I resented because I didn't want to be attached to that word just made me mad. I just want to say that for anyone who remembers feeling that way or is feeling that way. Sometimes you're just so angry and sad that you just don't want to hear about self-love and self-care. It really does feel like you crossed over into another world, and that's way over there in some la la land of like people with like butterflies and the sunshine and rainbows where they get to carry on and ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
So I appreciate these years later. I love rituals. I get how these smaller things in our day are the bigger things. These are the things that matter. I used to think, how can I fly off to another country and be okay again? How can I run away over here and do this big thing and have this big change and move countries or change my hair and like all these big things that you can feel like impulses, like you can become kind of impulsive. Like you just kind of do whatever. And now I understand it's very calming and centering to actually just look after yourself in those little ways throughout the day.
Yeah.
You couldn't have told me that back in the, you just couldn't have
not.
In the beginning.
It reminds me of, can't go over it, can't go around it, got to go through it. Like you cannot avoid it, even though you try. It's going to hit you right here and smack you. And you have, like you said, 2 years, right, of feeling this way. And, now you can finally feel a way to get, like, you probably didn't want to feel that way either. Like you weren't happy to be angry. You were angry at being angry as well. Were you? Like, were you feeling resentful for feeling this feeling, but you also felt like, screw you, everybody. Yeah.
You feel trapped in a feeling. And I know for 2 years, I actually enjoyed hearing about scenarios that I deemed worse than mine. It gave me relief. And that was such a strange thing to notice about myself. I would feel calmer if I watched the news and something horrendous had happened, or I heard a story about some other, a death or in some way, or some family or something that I felt like, well, I'm not alone. It was such a weird thing. So for 2 years, I was angry, set off really easily, triggered by things really easily. And then slowly it morphed and just calmed, and it's different for everyone.
So on that note, Julie, you're talking about anger. Like it makes my mind go to the 5 stages of grief. Like, is denial the first one, then anger? Like, what are those stages? Do you relate to those? Do you find that other widows can relate to it? Like, how does that work?
I kind of wish there was more on this about how where it originates from. The 5 stages of grief were created for the people who were dying. And it is funny to me that we use it for grief because it makes no sense. And yet it's referenced a lot, but it was created for someone who knows they're going to die. So they go through those stages of denial. Is it bargaining, anger?
Yeah.
Something.
Finally acceptance or whatnot.
And then finally acceptance. Yeah. And whatever the order is, it's like, I just think it doesn't apply to grief. And I think we want it to, because people want to believe in some kind of timeline. And I would have loved to feel that there is some structure to grief. I was searching for one. I was hoping there was some kind of shortcut. Can I just wrap this up and feel better? Now I see all these years later that I wouldn't want to wrap it up to feel all better, because then you're not linked to that person anymore. If there's just like some big closure moment, you don't care anymore, that goes against the lovely memory of that person that you can still enjoy. So I was looking for a cure, and I was hoping there was an end point. I wanted to skip ahead to better times. I didn't want to deal with some kind of process or something indefinite. It felt very scary, like a prison sentence for the rest of my life, feeling sad. So I think it's like, oh, well, I'll use this reference that I'll hop from this to this to this to this. But
yeah, that's
why it always confuses me when I hear people talking about it. Well, I guess they're in the bargaining phase, or, oh, I guess they're in the denial stage. And it's like, huh? Like, how come can you label it like that so easily or think that you should or would want to? You need to be able to hop around. I remember saying to people, like, I would go through all of them 20 times in one day. And then be okay for a little bit. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I remember the bargaining clearly. And maybe that one kind of fizzled out, but it's just, you can feel anything at any given time. Like, why would we ever think we can track or predict emotions or states of mind? It doesn't make any sense.
I am so glad we just busted this misconception. There's probably so many misconceptions in widowhood that
like widow's fire. Widow's fire is the thing I most wanted to shout from the rooftops, because it surprised me the most, because I couldn't have imagined that state of being, those kinds of thoughts and feelings, not advertised anywhere through life for me to, except for in Wedding Crashers, the movie Wedding Crashers with Will Ferrell and Owen Wilson. Mm-hmm. That's the only place my mind goes when I think of having been exposed to widow's fire before feeling it for myself, because Will Ferrell was crashing, they crash weddings, but Will Ferrell crashes funerals because he's like, the chicks are so horny. And it's like, there's something about death, and grief doing that to a person. So we kind of know, it's kind of known, maybe a little bit from somewhere like that, but
that's so true.
Misconceptions that widows are just people who have desires like anyone else who's still alive on this planet at any age. Like, someone just joined in their 70s. I saw a forum come in and someone's joining the community who's in their 70s. And it's like, so would we typically think? I would have thought someone in their, 50s, 60s, 70s, when they're widowed, it's just like, they just kind of sit around and don't care about sex and companionship or, hand holding and kissing and cuddling. As if they're in a different mindset because of their age. And no, that is not the case. Some of the people in the community, we've got people in their 70s, sexting and numerous people and telling us about it. And it's great. It's that's awesome. Should be exciting. That should be inspiring for us to know that as humans, we just stay ourselves. We stay still intact in all these human ways for decades. It doesn't end. You don't just stop caring about sex because you're a certain age or because you're widowed. It doesn't cross your mind anymore.
Yep. And I think that's also part of where, our denial or maybe even a shame comes in, because society doesn't recognize that. So they think, you're only going to peak in your sexuality for a man at 18 and for a woman at, 30. And then you feel like, okay, where does that leave me then? I'm 50 or I'm 60 or I'm 70. I feel like the acceptance isn't there. And that also makes the widow's fire feel so profound and great to find, because otherwise you feel kind of alone in this.
Yeah, because when you're saying shit, about society, not knowing or caring or whatever. And then that makes me think, okay, so should they, do they, why would they need to know? And it's almost like, is it realistic to feel like widow's fire is this household term? Because it is based on, initially, when you first feel it and find the term, my belief is that it's coming from a very raw place of you miss touch in all kinds of ways. So it's a very physical term when you first are trying to figure out what that is. You have a longing for physical touch, and that will be as prude or raunchy as who knows, but that is what it is until you find your way into a community of people who recognize that is a very strong natural reaction, and then you want to be able to feel a little bit lighter about it. Like once you know it exists, you want to feel like there's somewhere to go from there. So society to understand, really, widow's fire, the benefits of having a term that everyone could know and be able to refer people is because there'd be an understanding that that's like a starting point. Widow's fire is a starting point. Once you find the words, the term, then you begin basically a journey, whatever kind of journey you're up for, of exploration, self-discovery, what intimacy, eroticism, all these things mean. It does. I think it's, again, there can be so many misconceptions. Yes, within widowhood and within widow's fire, which is what I want to be working on, is how widow's fire be this like really lovely term. Like if you meet a widow and it's like, oh, are you dating? I want people to feel like they could even ask someone that without the widow being offended or people being awkward. It's like, do you have, like, I have a friend who's, this is a bit complicated, her like stepdaughter's stepdad, basically like a friend knows someone who passed away and knows, the widow as an acquaintance. And she was like, I wish I could tell her, like, I don't know, should I tell her that widow's fire exists? Like, is it too soon? When could I tell her? How would I tell her? And it's like, well, these are the things I want to work on. Because I want to get us to such a place where it would feel easy to be like, oh, and well, have you heard about widow's fire? Because I'm sure if someone's taking an interest in someone's experience of their loss, then I'm sure you're feeling all kinds of feelings about losing a partner specifically. You've lost your partner. You've lost that romantic connection. So you must be missing romance.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is around your own self-worth, your own values, setting your own standards, and going out into the dating world. So, we've talked about our emotions, we've talked about rituals, we've talked about, not even wanting to go out or getting your feet wet, but then also having this like other balancing point about, falling so hard for somebody and thinking that they're going to fix your life. So coming back to the source, back to it all, setting those standards for yourself, giving yourself that self-talk. How do widows and widowers go about doing that?
There are a lot of layers here, because when I was widowed and I had a newborn baby, a fatherless son, I felt very self-conscious. I worried that I wouldn't be wanted. My self-worth, my self-esteem dropped like instantly. I attempted to stay confident because I felt that's an attractive quality, is when you're confident. So I sort of powered through. When I was dating, I just decided to just show up with confidence. But my actual vibe that you can't even see, but people feel, like you wouldn't necessarily hear it in my words, but you'd feel it, must have been of sort of desperation. Like, would you want me? Are you going to want me? Who wants me? Like, who would want someone like me? So there was a lot of seeking of approval that I'm still okay in the world with these labels, like as at the status of widow and single mom. I was like, well, these are like the two, what I decided were like the two worst things you could have on your, like, a profile of a dating app. I was like I am not a catch, was my feeling, even though I felt like as a person, I'm still me. But when you meet someone for the first time, these are the things, like the checklist, like, what do you do for work? How old are you? How many kids? Do you have kids or not? Married, divorced, widowed? It's just, I'm like, oh, I'm in this unique scenario where I worried that men, and some did validate my concerns, and they were reflections back at me of this issue, is I had men say that they felt like they would never be able to measure up. Like how, like they would always be in competition. And that would be coming from an insecure man. An insecure man would say that to, and then to an insecure woman. So you can imagine so many incompatibilities in the early days. and you never know who you're going to meet, and it's all good experience. But I actually had to dip so low down to realize how bad it had gotten, because I dated a lot and was on the search. I had the Limerence stuff going on, and anyone I met, I saw as like a potential answer to my problem. So that was a lot of pressure to put on someone. And then I was trying to suss them out. Would they like me? Do they like me? How do I know they like me? What are they saying? I worried about my post-baby body. I'd had a baby, I'd gained weight, lost weight, boobs are different. I felt self-conscious, and I was hoping to meet someone who would make me feel great about myself, because I wasn't so good at doing that for myself. And that's not a great position to be in. And it's just worth asking yourself if you feel good about yourself. And if you kind of don't, it's not a great time to go out on a date and seek validation, because you can easily come off as desperate, and then kind of impatient and frustrated. And then that is a slippery slope to bitterness, which I'm always careful to not. I've never fallen into being bitter. I've been able to see that it's all useful, because had I have not felt so shitty about myself, I wouldn't have known the contrast to then what it is to feel really good about yourself. And that's been very rewarding to build myself back up. I dated for so long and struggled having like a very, very young son. I didn't enjoy a lot of aspects of motherhood because of grief, and having a toddler around and trying to date, and then trying to put a new man in front of a toddler, non-biological child. I had like the first boyfriend, didn't take much of an interest, had kids of his own. The dynamic of him having kids he sees part-time, but I get to see my kid all the time. There were a lot of divorced versus widowed. We struggled, and he had his own stuff going on, this first boyfriend I had for a year. And it just knocked me down so many pegs, because he had his own reference points for what being hot is, what an attractive woman is. And he projected all of that onto me. And I was actually quite fragile. It was my first boyfriend. I didn't know what I was signing up to. I was quite happy to commit and decide I'm going to be with this person. And instead of taking it nice and, slow and steady and watching out for signs that maybe you shouldn't be with someone, I just was so excited to be with someone. So my self-worth, I felt like my self-esteem was just circling the drain the longer I was with someone who, it's not even like, it's because I was not okay. This is the thing. You have to ask yourself, am I okay? Because it can't be about the other person. You can't, the other person, basically a new partner, new dating scenarios are being able to compartmentalize. That's a nice, fun thing to do. Go on a date. It takes time to get to know someone. In the meantime, am I okay? Am I going out with this person because I think they're good looking? And if I go out with a good looking person, it must mean that I'm good looking, and I need to feel that way. And that person will help me feel that way. So there's a lot going on. It's complex. Being widowed, you can feel like you're a lesser person. However, we should feel sexier than ever about being widowed. I've always felt strongly that if you're widowed, it means you were very likely, hopefully, still in love with your partner, and you lost them. So you have all this amazing, loving energy that knows how to flow, or that you do flow and love to give and receive. And you're perfectly set up for partnership. You know what that is. You know what it takes. You know about commitment. You know about hard times. You know about seeing someone through, their darkest days, and walking someone to the end of their life, or being, showing up for someone. It should be kind of hot to go out with a widow. It should be very attractive to be widowed. And I know it has this image of old wrinkly person dressed in black, but being widowed should look like, ooh, that's someone who really knows how to love. It's not that divorced people are, it can't even be a comparison thing. Oh, you're divorced, so you gave up on love, or you got dumped, or, you decided to, give up on your marriage. It's not even it's just on its own, just being widowed should be seen as this beautiful thing, this person who knows how to love in this big way and knows how short life is and how precious life is and how to just live each day like it's your last, and all these like amazing gifts you get given from grief can be applied to new partnerships. So you would think it would be this like kind of sexy, like, ooh, I met a widow, like
Yeah. Yep. I love that. I think it's incomparable really to anything else. It's unique, like you said. It's a bit mysterious, and I think if people lean into it, they can find, real success in their grief, in their state, like in their current state. It's just a really refreshing way of looking at it.
yeah, I think
Um,
people who meet a widow or widower may worry that they would be being compared. But we are all, like, as we're getting older, we're all doing funny things in our minds from past relationships, and like the person you're talking to has a life of their own scenarios and reference points. So like they might be worried about how you're going to compare them while you're over here worrying about if they're going to think you're, whatever it is. We're all figuring it out as we go along. So we don't want to just get hung up on one aspect of ourselves. Like, I am widowed. That should be like just not a thing. It shouldn't need to bring as much, baggage or be seen as baggage.
right. Yeah. Like baggage currency, right? Like if you break up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, is that a lot of baggage? Maybe. Or divorced, is that more baggage? If you're widowed, is that even more baggage? Like it shouldn't be measured in that sense.
Yeah. Like really, who are you if you show up to a date not making it about all those things or worrying about what any of that means? And just one final thought on the sort of desperate vibes, despy, I call them despy vibes, that we don't mean to have, but we definitely can have, where we want to love someone and be loved. We miss that. And that's very relatable for all people when you've had your heart broken or lost someone. We are automatically more vulnerable and easier targets for certain scams and certain kinds of people. And I noticed that a lot of widows have ended up in abusive second marriages or very quickly remarried and ended up in really bad scenarios. And even myself, after some years, seeing an opportunity to jump into a relationship because I saw the opportunity and he seemed great. And it's like, okay, I just want what I want and this person will have me. So, okay. And that self-worth thing, if you really feel like you deserve something great and you hold out for it, you're so much better positioned for actually something great instead of just naively feeling like brave, like I'm hopeful and I'm going to jump into this. From a place of whether you don't notice, you don't realize till after that it came from a desperate place. I felt myself getting older and I didn't have a second child. And it's almost like, this is my chance. And even though I dressed it up as like, no, I think I really found the one, it really did come from still a place of like a self-worth issue that still needed to be worked on. So it's, we're all works in progress. I don't like the idea of people speaking from a place like they've finally figured everything out, because we listen to people speaking about things as if, oh, I did all this and now found out and learned all this, so now I can say definitively this is how it is. Like, we are all always at risk of fucking up in life and making some funny mistakes, and then you got to be able to, or hopefully you share, and then we're all like okay with the fact that we're all still always figuring it out. It's not like you achieve perfect self-worth status and your life is like fixed. It's so ridiculous. Like there's a lot of like claims, like I see a lot of Instagram posts and just social media stuff in general that's very like, do you know what I mean? That vibe of like, you know, girl, like know your worth, like boss bitchy, like don't settle, very intense, like as if, okay, I'm not going to let anyone mess with me ever again. And it's like,
that's not realistic.
Still, like, you're just human, and just see how it goes. Just do some stuff and see what happens. And yes, up your self-worth, but then know that you won't know until you interact with people where you're at. Like it could dip and then come back. You need to bring it back up again. And like you kind of, sometimes I feel like I've lowered standards, whatever that means for me, only to realize like, hold on a second. No. Like we know we want, you know, a certain kind of quality of like character and things like that. You just have to play around with it and just keep exploring in life. There's no final destination.
No. And I think that really helps. I mean, people can go check out the full blog post that you've written here. I think there's so many great insights, but like to end it on that note, I think one of the last pieces you say in this article is you cannot fail. Like, guess what? You cannot fail. And I love that because there is no right or wrong. Like there's just learning.
Yes, I am glad that I do still get these opportunities to live and grow and have such a variety of enriching experiences that sometimes feel like these big disappointments, but actually it's all just a part of being alive and being here while we're here. So it's all good. Like, you know, it's all good. It's all worth doing. I used to get really upset when I'd go on a bad date. Now I either find the humor in it or I pick up on something that was useful to discover about myself. Like, actually, I thought I was okay with, you know, going out with someone much older or, you know, does or doesn't have kids, but perhaps, you know, when I think about it, maybe I do kind of want this or not that or whatever. It's all just sifting and sorting. It's all just accumulating experiences along the way, and it needs to not matter where you find on any given day, because it's very temporary. It's just that day, where you are that day. So no big conclusions do we ever need to come to, because the next day will bring something different. So whether you're partnered or not, or going through a breakup, or just starting to see someone, like the evolution of it all, it's always unfolding. So dating isn't ever something we need to like overly define. That's why I think this to-do list is almost like the to-do list is really just sort of like a keep going vibe, and learn along the way, learn about yourself. It's all really not to make it a selfish thing, but it's like self-discovery. It just always will be, because it's just you in there. It's just you inside there. So you know, there's these different characters come in and out. Enjoy them and let them go when the, you know, exit stage left, when someone's like, okay, that's my cue. Like, I'm cut, you know, they're written out. When someone's written out of your story, just okay, like let's, and the next person will
move on. I love it. Well, I think that really you know, covers it all. And like, we'll have way more discussions like this in the future. You know, check out our YouTube channel, check out the blog, hopefully eventually a podcast in the future too. But Julia, this has been so inspiring and awesome chatting with you about this. I absolutely loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mel. I can talk about love, sex, romance, dating, widowhood all day long. So always enjoy an opportunity.
Yay.